and welcome to But I Digress, where sometimes it's our 3rd year anniversary! Can you believe it? 3 years. What a ride. I can't thank you. Hey, hold it. Alright, I know. Last month was actually the show's 3rd year anniversary because I started the show in October 2012. For that I apologize. As I mentioned in a recent blog post that I posted on my website, I have been taking on a whole slew of projects to the point where I've been kind of over-promising things and under-delivering, which I intend to remedy. I'll be posting an update video on the future of the show in the near future, I hope. Alright, and with that out of the way, I also know that I said that my next video was going to be an Avengers Age of Ultron review once the film hit Blu-ray and DVD, but it's no longer timely right now, so I think I'm going to save it for a future date. Hey, hold on. I know. Again, I'm sorry, but I promise it'll be worth it. I've got ideas about how to make it work. With that being said, since I started this show talking about conventions, I have made it a tradition to talk about conventions when the anniversary rolled around. And this year is no different. This time, however, I will be talking about how to make a great book pitch. And I don't mean to publishers. I mean, if you're an independent author and you write speculative fiction like myself, you go to a lot of places like Gen Con and comic book conventions and science fiction conventions and all of that. And when you're there, in all likelihood, the people aren't going to know who you are or what your story is about. So it's up to you to sell them on it and convince them that it's worth their time and money. And I'm going to tell you right now, I've learned a lot of things about making pitches like that from personal experience and from talking with other independent writers. And I am here to share it all with you, which we'll get into after the theme song. Roll it!
You got the touch. You got the power. Yeah.
Now, depending on the venue that you're at, there are different things that go into what makes a great book pitch. But regardless of where you are, first and foremost, what you need is a plot summary, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's you explain to the readers what your story, what your book is about. And I think one of the key elements that you want to use, because it'll save you a heck of a lot of time and be able to maximize the number of people you'll be able to talk to, is what I like to call, in honor of my English professor from college, the Hensleyan one-sentence summary, which admittedly he did say that he stole from TV Guide. So if you really want to know how to do this, read an issue of TV Guide when they give you a summary of an episode of a TV show or a movie. Now, no matter how complicated your story is, this is actually something that would be a great writer's exercise for you. No matter how complicated, no matter how big your story is, how big your book is, break it down to its base elements so that you can throw it out to somebody, tell somebody what it's about in 1, maybe 2 sentences max. That way you can communicate quickly what it's about. And then, if you use that to get them hooked, then go into a little bit more detail if they ask questions about it. You also need to make sure you mention who the major characters are and what roles they serve within the confines of the story, especially if you have a very character-driven piece, because the characters will be the big selling point for your book. And also, very importantly, never ever give out any spoilers unless you run into one of those rare, weird people who love spoilers and they like having stories, in my estimation, ruined for them before they buy it. Just don't do it. I don't like giving out spoilers about anything, let alone my own dang books. And you don't want to do that either, because it might reduce your chances of getting the said reader to actually pick up the book and read it. Along with the plot summary, you also want to give an overview of the series if your book is part of one. Reason being that you want to do that is there are a lot of readers out there who aren't just looking for one new book to read, they're looking for an entire new series of books to read or a new author to get into. And if you can sell them on the first book, they will come back and buy every single entry in your series or any other book that you have written. or they will wait in eager anticipation of the next books that you publish in that series or that you just publish in general. I know this from experience because, believe it or not, I have had a few readers come back saying that they had read a particular book that I had sold to them the previous year at Gen Con and now wanted even more of the books that I had available because I had gotten them hooked on that with just that one. But also, make sure, again, when you're doing this, know...
Spoilers.
Along with the plot summary, you also have to make sure that you detail your story's promises. These are the sorts of things that you are intending to give to readers, what you are going to offer to the readers by enjoying or reading your story. Are you promising thrills? Are you promising romance? Are you promising comedy? You gotta make sure that you detail all of those, because if those are things that readers are interested in having and that you can convince them that you can come through on those promises with your book, they will be even more interested in buying it. And if you fulfill those promises, they will come back to you for even more of your books. Another thing you're going to want to do is compare your story to works that have already been published. The question you want to ask yourself is my book similar to anything that has been published before that my audience would be familiar with? And I know this seems a little bit weird, especially if you, like me, like telling stories that are fresh and new and interesting, but by doing this, you can pique the interest of potential readers by giving them a point of reference so they can understand through shorthand the sort of story that you're trying to tell. For example, with Ninjas and Talking Trees right here, when I sold this at Gen Con in particular, I told people that it was Monty Python and the Holy Grail meets The Princess Bride with a dash of anime. Does that describe the book in its entirety? Not completely, but it gave those readers an idea of the sort of humor and the sort of plot that I would be using. And honestly, it's what actually helped sell the book as well as it did, because then people knew what to expect. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you definitely need to make sure that you explain the unique aspects of your book. What makes it different than what has come before? Because in all likelihood, your readers are not going to want to get the exact same story that they have seen or read before, except repackaged, okay? You're not the Asylum. You can't get away with making low-budget knockoffs of good movies. So you need to make sure you do this because it will help to differentiate, to distinguish you from your competition. Because if you're at a big convention like Gen Con, you're not going to be the only vendor there. You're not even going to be the only author there. And con-goers are usually running on a limited budget. So you have to make sure that you sell them on what it makes your book different, what makes it worth buying, so that those con-goers will be willing to slap down their hard-earned money on your stuff and not somebody else's. Something else I recommend that you do is adjust your pitch depending on the person who you are talking to. By that I mean you watch for when people come by and they talk to you, watch for things like the costumes that they're wearing or the clothes that they have, to give you an idea of what sorts of things that they're into, so that way if that'll be a visual cue that can tell you, hey, this is someone who might be interested in this particular book that I have. I also recommend when you're doing this that you ask those people questions about whatever it is that they have. Maybe it's something that they just bought, a plushie, or maybe it's about their costume, or about something else that they have on their person, the t-shirt that they have. Give them compliments like that. So it gets their attention, and then it gives you a chance to ask them some questions, so that way they know that you're interested in them as a person and not just as a potential buyer. And then you can use that as a jumping off point to say, hey, if you're into this, you might like this book that I have. For example, there was one time when I was at Gen Con where there was a guy who came by wearing homemade power armor that he had created himself. And I said, hey, and I asked him a few questions about how he made it, and then worked it in after all of that, saying, hey, I have this book here called Pandora's Box. You might enjoy it because there are characters in it who wear power armor themselves. This next one, I know, seems obvious, but it is something that needs to be discussed, and that is the prices of your books. This is something I highly recommend that you save for last in your pitch and focus on getting them sold on the story and the characters and all of that, so that way they'll be more willing to pay whatever amount of money that you're asking for those books. Or you could bypass it altogether and just have a price guide set up on your booth someplace, so that way they can just make a quick reference at the beginning and see how much everything is. Otherwise, unless they ask you up front how much the books are, I don't recommend going into that. But it is something that you should gloss over. You definitely do need to discuss, especially if you're offering some sort of a deal on those. A lot of people, and I've done this too, if it's the last day of the convention and you want to try to clean out as much of your inventory as you can offer some sort of a special on there. You know, last day of the con special, you know, where you discount some of the books. Or you could do something like what I do, which is with these two small books right here, they're normally $7 a piece, but if you buy them together, I sell them to that buyer for $12. So it's essentially $1 off of each book. But when you do this, make sure that you're not being pushy, all right? Don't just practically shove it in there insisting that it's the best deal that they can get at the convention or whatever, because people will see through it and it'll turn them off, not only to you at that moment, but they may never want to read any of your books ever. This next one I've saved for last because it's not always going to be something that you'll be able to use, and that is gimmicks. Why do I say that? Well, it's because it's going to depend on the venue that you're at. If you're at something like an author fair at a library, that might be a place where you expect to be a little bit more professional, so you don't want to go as crazy when you're at something like that. But if it's a convention, that's a bit more of an informal setting and it's a bit wilder, so you can cut loose a little bit more and go a little bit crazier with your gimmicks. But what do I mean by gimmicks? Well, it could be things like you could wear a costume, you could have decorations, you could have contests or giveaways that people can enter, you know, things like that. You know, use it as a way for you to express yourself creatively in other ways, to use those other creative juices besides your literary ones. So if you're great at making costumes, make a costume. If you're great with decorations, make some awesome decorations. You know, my friend Ed Russell, who writes a lot of zombie books, one time came to Gen Con and he had this homemade giant zombie head that he had made that had a hole in the top so the kids could stick their hands in and they could pull candy out of it. But he put a bunch of things inside of it that made it feel all gross and gooey, so it was like they're sticking their hand in there and they're playing around with brains and guts and all of that before they get their candy. You know, it's a way to tell the people who are coming by, hey, I'm just as much of a nerd as you are, you should come talk to me and see what I have to offer you. Wow, that was a lot to cover. Whew. I'm sure this video went a little bit long, but this is information that I really wanted you to know because I really do think that if you put these into practice, you'll sell more books at your next book signing, whether that's at a library or a convention or whatnot, because improving your pitch is one of the best ways to improve your book sales when you're working interpersonally. And who knows, maybe we'll run into each other at one of these venues. You know, I've been trying to go to more conventions, so I may bump into you. And if I do, please come, please let me know that you saw this video and tell me if any of the advice that I just gave helped you sell more books. And if you don't tell me in person, well, leave me a comment below because I would love to hear from you. Maybe you have some other bits of advice to add to what I've already given, you know? What are some things that you have done to help your pitches when you're selling books, you know? Or maybe you know picked up some stuff for some other people, you know? Add to this list because I would love to be able to help other writers and we should all help each other because that's what authors do. And I also want to issue a thank you to all of you who've been sticking with me all 3 years that I've been doing this show. And for those of you who are seeing me for the first time or you're a newer viewer, well, welcome to the madness that is my mind. So with all of that said, here's to another great year of But I Digress.